I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. In regards to the future, what do you see as the greatest challenges and where are the greatest opportunities? And I'll say for my part, I think that one of the great opportunities we have is I think the right can gain a lot of protest votes, but when they're actually in power, I think people start to get aggravated with them because they don't actually provide a viable alternative to the status quo.
I think that's right, though. I think on bad days, I think this country leans conservative. What do I mean? There's a status quo. I talked about change elections, but then there's a little bit of a status quo and people aren't that open to change come governing. But what I said earlier, we're witnessing a kind of failure of governance. We're not getting much from, doesn't necessarily translate into support for a progressive future. I do think the ability to harness technologies of the future so they don't become so consolidated as we've seen of our media, to really find a way to keep open AI, to make sure that workers and people are protected if possible. And I do hope that there's a real break with neoliberalism. This is out 5 years, 10, 20 years, have me back on and we can talk about the future. I'll think deeper. But there is something about this country right now where you go day by day. The 100 days was obliterated. Every day was 100 days. We're working on 100 days of resistance, not 100 days of Trump over at The Nation, both editorially and politically. But I do think there has to be a sense, again, of building a community that can overcome the chaos in the short term and then build out to bigger ideas that have concreteness for people, and then bigger ideas of reforming, changing society. But there are things to continue taking on because austerity still has a power that has to be contested. I'm not sure abundance is the word I would use as Ezra Klein did in this time.
You know what's weird? I was going to ask you, what do you make of all this abundance stuff? I'm a little bit skeptical of Ezra Klein.
I think he's talented, he's smart. I'm not sure I would have spent my talent and energy on supporting abundance at a time like this, because there's another A word which we spend a lot of time talking about, austerity. And to get from austerity to abundance is a real leap. I also think it's a little bit about the dangers of overregulation, which is, the regulatory stuff was always a prime right-wing Trump. On the other hand, I don't know if you remember George McGovern. I'll stop here. Who ran for president?
I know George, yeah.
72. He was. So when he really retired, he took over an inn, I think in Vermont or New Hampshire. And every year he'd write a piece for the Wall Street Journal about how the inn wasn't doing well because of overregulation. I'm not sure. Maybe there were one or two excessive regulations. That's always possible. But I just don't think George McGovern was suited to running an inn in New Hampshire or Vermont. I think abundance is a case about the progressive community, Democrats being more competent, technically efficient, and more technocratic. And that's not my vision. I'm not opposed to mastery of skills and competence, but I remember Dukakis in the tank preaching competence as his purpose for running. People want competence, but they want more. And I think that's where abundance is limited in its sense of.
Is it maybe too focused on the technocratic element at the expense of, a more populist vision?
Yeah, and I'm not going to do 1,000 points of light, but there is people do seek more than just they want someone who's competent, and we see how incompetent and unhinged some of what we're witnessing is, but they're not going to stop and say, oh, I'm happy my technocrat is leading me forward. I do think that Mr. George W., who's taken that he's getting a pass, and that Liz Cheney was key to the last days of the campaign, I can't bear. But I do think Bush was defeated finally because of Hurricane Katrina and heck of a job Brownie, his FEMA director, where people just saw how the failure of humanity in mastery of skills like cleaning up and helping people. But Iraq, of course, was the great. So I will end with no more Cheneys, and to remember that to take a country into war is the greatest sin, it seems to me, of a president, but to seek more vision from those who aim to govern. And I come back to mastery and competence in New York City. We could use some of that, but not from bullies.